This one's called Chasing the Interesting Light. So Peterson says, see the light, shoot the light is the wrong approach and has led many young photographers astray. This is one of the places where I actually disagree with Peterson, so off the path we go. You need to learn to be able to read the light and learn how to correctly and creatively meter the light to come up with interesting photos. So you need to learn to look at your scene very carefully, look at the lighting within the scene, and pay attention to the time of day and weather conditions when you're outside. Inside, you're looking at sort of natural sources versus artificial sources, mixing the two perhaps. And if you don't like the light that's there and that exists, create your own with strobes or speed lights, video lighting, hardware store light fixtures, flashlights, glow sticks, Christmas lights, whatever you can find and get your hands on to make it more interesting. Think a little bit like a cinematographer or a stage lighting designer in terms of designing the lighting around the image that you want to create. Let's talk a little bit about magic hour. The best light happens, frankly, when you prefer to be sleeping or eating breakfast or dinner. It's about an hour before and after sunrise and sunset. So you've got about a 2-hour window in the morning and about a 2-hour window in the afternoon where it's just magic. The URL here on the screen links to a site where you can look up the sunrise and sunset times for any particular date and any particular location. And that can be very useful if you need to plan your shoot. The good news about shooting in the winter is that the sun's at a lower angle, and it can give you more interesting light coming through things like windows more in the middle of the day. And you get a little more leeway in terms of when light is useful and interesting in the winter than you do in the summer. Here's an example of that magic hour photo. This was taken right as the sun came up over the student center of the rec center. And if you look at this picture, you can see that the bottom story of this building is still in the shade and the top of the building is in the sun. So the sidewalk, the sun isn't up yet, but the roof of the building, the sun is up. And this is a much more interesting picture than a few minutes earlier or a few minutes later. Let's look at some different lighting designs and scenarios. Open shade is a lot of fun to shoot in because it's frankly easy to meter and hard to screw up. You can shoot from any direction. It doesn't matter what direction you're facing. The light's going to be basically the same going any direction. So this means you can pick and choose your composition based more on foreground and background than having to necessarily work around where does the light work. When the sun's out, the traditional can't screw it up is front lighting. The sun is behind the camera, going straight into the faces of your subjects. It makes for very harsh shadows, but it makes for the light to be fairly even. It tends to promote squinting in your subjects' faces, so it's something I tend to avoid if I can. It's also really flat in terms of not producing a very three-dimensional image. When we talk about side lighting, things get more interesting. The light's now coming from the side, and our subject gets to be very three-dimensional. We now know, because there are highlights in one part and shadows in other parts, we see a three-dimensionality to it, and it gets much more interesting. It can get kind of mixed. So for example, this is in the administration building's rotunda. On camera right, we have large windows bringing in lots of blue light. On camera right, we have the interior light, which is very warm. That mix can be kind of challenging to photograph. Dappled light, where you've got pools of bright and dark light, are really interesting, but can be tough to meter because you don't know which you want to prioritize. So you may need to experiment a little bit. I mean, here's another example of dappled light. And she's just sort of taken a guess. The highlights are a little bright, the shadows are a little dark, and overall, it's an interesting image. An alternative to dappled light is to move your subject ever so slightly so they are in a clean pool of light with the dappled light behind them. Backlighting is frequently interesting. It makes glassware and liquids look really nice. outside, it can sort of capture that warmth of a sunrise or sunset. It can capture that dust that's in the air and give it some atmosphere. It helps bring out shapes in things. And in some places, it just gives a nice sense of time. So this sort of says late afternoon. We see the sun is out. This picture isn't so much about playing volleyball so much as just being outside with your friends. Sometimes the light gets more interesting by turning it off. This is in a microbiology lab that's very evenly lit with big fluorescent light banks. But by turning off the room lights and leaving that biosafety hood light on, we now have one light source, and your eye sort of goes to that brighter part of the image, and it's a more interesting picture. Go to a theater production. Don't watch the action, but just look at the way the lighting is set up. Every light, every highlight, every shadow in this production has been carefully placed to render a specific effect and a specific color and a specific mood. So let's look at some examples of interesting light. Here's a case where we've got work lights behind her, and again, just put those work lights in the picture. The setting sun can be a nice image. Again, this is more about feel sometimes than it is about detail in the image. Glassware photographs really nicely when it's backlit. So this is simply a bunch of glassware on a shelf with a window behind it. This is over in the behavioral sciences building on one of those glass panels. Again, more about the notion of studying than it is about the particular student. So we go ahead and let that student go into the shade. Or wait for somebody in a cowboy hat to walk past the nice light at the stock show. More backlighting. Silhouettes rely a lot on shape, so we need the shape of the ball and the blower basket thingy to really make this picture work. You can play with balance between inside and outside. This is a photo booth that's in an old VW bus at a football game, so we simply wait till the sun has substantially gone down, and we can get a sense for what's going on outside, but our emphasis is on the inside. Again, with candles, it's about waiting until there's enough darkness that you can really see the effect of the candle. Sometimes light is interesting when there isn't much of it. This is inside one of those laser tag tents that they set up at Ram Welcome. And this is extremely dark. This is at an ISO of probably 100,000 at f2.8 wide open and a shutter speed of maybe a 60th of a second. So this is very dark, but again, interesting. Speeches are often lit from the front. So move around to the side, photograph the speaker from the side, and we've turned that front light into side light and made the speaker look a little more interesting. Or you can play with what's in the highlights and what's in the shadows. Look for those pools of light coming in through a window, and you can frame something in a pool of light with things that are out of the light and really draw attention in. Again, light and shadow. The dust from the parking lot is kicked up and given sort of a glow to the football stadium as the lights are on at the end of the last game. Or you wait until the sun is almost down and just skimming across the top of the river. You see the texture in the water as a result of where the light is, and the light's hitting her face, but the trees behind her are largely in the shade. This is the shadow from the writing on the window, or a silhouette in front of a PowerPoint presentation. This was a case where we needed to photograph the book, and rather than just do something boring, I had the art director stand outside of my office with a flash, and the stripes are from the Venetian blinds on my window. So this is completely created light. So is the blue here. I've stashed a flash inside that by the microscope, lighting up the researcher and allowing everything else to just sort of go blue. Again, sometimes you create it. This happens to be a student who studies neuroscience. So we found a brain scan, put it into a PowerPoint slide, and projected that with a video projector onto her face. Again, sometimes it's about what you don't show. This is one light with a very restricted beam, just hitting his face, just his hands, and letting everything else just go super dark. This is what, again, back to that magic hour before the sun is up. This is probably 45 minutes before sunrise, but we're seeing the greenhouses as prominent at this hour in the morning. So get out there and just pay attention to the light that's going on around you as you're going through your assignments, and things will be much more interesting and useful.